Alright, I wanted to record this outside, get some fresh air, look at this rocking chair, which has given me PTSD because of my back injury from 3 months ago, from lifting it to make a YouTube video. But there's comfort. There's comfort in knowing it was always going to be that way. I had no free will. I just watched... One second. Oh, yeah, there's some background noise pollution as usual, but we'll see if I can just get my brain to ignore it, and you'll have to suffer with it too, I suppose. There was a Sam Vaknin video on free will a few weeks ago, and I'd meant to watch it, and I had not watched it until now, and so I took a few notes and wanted to do some tangential rambling about various thoughts with regards to free will. And mostly what Vaknin says is that free will is a useless fiction, like God and the afterlife. And he mostly says all of the opinions that I've expressed about free will, just in a smarter way with bigger words, because he's a smart guy who knows a lot of things and knows how to use big words. But one thing I was thinking that he references, because this is a lot of the talk about free will, right? What is really the concern here? And a lot of the concern is with regards to moral responsibility. And despite the fact that I've made this point many times, I just am going to reiterate that it's almost like the word morality is the problem. That it's... I think morality is very closely tied to religious tradition. And so if you are having a conversation and you're approaching something from like the Christian angle or something, then maybe it's a useful word to you. But for those of us who aren't so devout, it really makes sense to sort of get rid of the word morality. And I mean, maybe there's a context in which it's useful. I mean, I'm using it right now. But what I'm really saying is that what we're saying really is what we like and don't like, because there's all sorts of people with different views on morality, right? Different atheists and agnostics have different opinions, different religious people. I mean, of course, I've talked about the ways in which you can find, obviously, people of the same religious faith who supposedly should have the same values and doctrine, and here's good and here's bad. It's in this book, but they still choose to either interpret the word in different ways, selectively focus on certain passages, selectively ignore certain passages, and so on. But really what we're concerned about with free will, I mean, a lot of people, the concern is, well, where is the moral responsibility? And what I'm saying is that none of it has to do with morality. It has to do with behavior that we like and dislike. And yes, semantics, right? Just semantics. You could still say that's morality, right? But I think it's a more honest conversation when you look at it from the perspective of, I like this person and their behavior. I dislike this person and their behavior. And I don't know that it necessarily has to do with us, most people really being so concerned with like the net amount of suffering caused by a person, right? Of course, we dislike people who harm us, but most of us don't really care about who has the least amount of products made from slave labor. Now, maybe we should, right? I don't know what that would mean, that we should, but some might say, well, maybe we need to start worrying, and a lot of you watching this, myself included, aren't vegans, right? And so maybe we should like people more based on who is the best vegan. There's all sorts of angles in ways to measure how much someone cares, or at least behaves as if they care about suffering. But really, if you analyze who we choose to engage with and who we like and dislike, I don't know that it's about that as much as, of course, yes, we do care about who cares about our own suffering. And yes, perhaps the suffering of whoever is in our circle that we also value, our family, or if you do love animals, or whatever you care about, right? We like people that care about the things that we care about. But the problem with debating on morality is it's often like trying to convince someone to care about things that they don't, right? Maybe someone would stop eating pig if they just watched that YouTube video you sent them. That is entirely possible. But for the most part, it's simply a matter of what someone cares about and doesn't. But let's get back more focused on free will. So Vaknin talks about how we're constrained by our internal world, genetics, childhood trauma, temperament, personality, attachment style, and I agree with all of that entirely. I've noticed with myself that whether you want to say that this is a matter of free will or not, that I feel like I might with time gain in my ability to articulate and be self-aware about certain aspects of my nature, but I definitely feel less able to change that. Now you might say, well, you are even self-awareness. You could argue that that's a matter of control, that I'm choosing that, and we can get into that. Oh, keep stepping on leaves. We could get into that later maybe, but I guess what I'm just saying on a side note, as far as the practical implications of this sort of conversation, in the conclusion that you already know that I've come to, is that we don't have free will, is that, once again, maybe that could be a semantics thing, right? How are you defining free will and all of that? But I think it's important for all of us, as much as we can, even if maybe you have no influence and you're set on the course, and of course ultimately this is my conclusion, that you're just set on the course and you'll be as self-aware as you always were going to be, but that it might be a better, at least in the sense of I'm trying to avoid using the word choice, right? Because ultimately I'd be a contradiction, but I do think that there is a value in act, just like Sam Vaknin. You act as if you have free will. You feel as if you do. It's a useful illusion. So I'm giving the caveat here that I'm going to start saying the word choice, even though that would be an apparent contradiction. So insofar as you would have choice, I think it's a lot better to figure out who you are in a lot of ways, and your tendencies, basically, to figure out your robotic tendencies, and that way you can articulate those to the people that you want to know you and that you want to get along with. And if you understand yourself, and you can explain that to someone else, then maybe it helps in your ability to exist in a way that's peaceful. I don't know. Whatever. I guess what I'm saying is I've noticed, like with the attachment style as an example, I definitely have anxious attachment style. I don't really see myself ever fully shaking that. I can do different strategies of like, I don't want to be needy and crazy right now, so let me fucking see if I can distract myself by making this YouTube video on free will so that I have my mind elsewhere, right? But I don't really see myself actually changing the core of the whatever caused that, right? Genetics, childhood, trauma, whatever it may be. And so I think one potential way of dealing with that is, now that I'm more aware of it, the anxious attachment style, than I would have been, maybe 10 years ago, I can articulate the experience to someone, and it gives them the opportunity, if they're, for whatever reason, wanting to exist with me peacefully and keep me around and have a future, whether it's friendship or romantic. Obviously I'm referencing more romantic in this context, but it allows them to understand and to empathize and to perhaps take certain things less personally, or to know how to respond to my version of crazy. What else do I have here? I don't know. I wrote down, I can't choose to be shallow, Hal. I don't know. For those of you who haven't seen it, short premise of the movie is a guy who, I don't even remember if this is exactly accurate, but I think it's basically he sees unattractive women as being attractive. I guess he's like, he has this, whatever, I forgot what thing happens to him, and suddenly he just, if someone has a great heart and personality, he sees them as like supermodels or something. But my point with that really is just that, and I've given these examples countless times, just that you can't really, there would be no reason to believe that, that free will sort of exists in these weird areas, right? It's like I can give all these examples on where you would see there is no free will, all these factors of life you can't control, not just in the obvious external world, but even internally, in terms of you have countless experiences that certainly impact your personality, and you can't choose whether you're attracted to men or women or whatever. And I can't choose to find 500-pound women to be my number one kink. That's not really within the realm of choice. And so I think some of these more absurd examples, or just the obvious aspects of who we are and how we interact and what we like and dislike and how it's going to affect us, when you see the ways in which you don't have free will in these areas, it becomes more and more clear where would you draw the line? Where would you draw the line that suddenly you've exited the realm of external and internal variables that are obviously not within your grasp to really change, and then suddenly you do have control in this certain moment, right? And why are you attributing that? How are you doing that? And I mean, people even talk about, right, and I think this is sort of interesting, the idea that Vaknin referenced this, Sam Harris talks about this, people who can plead insanity, right? And, I don't know how I feel about that. We're all insane, right? We all, if we did something that was against the interest of society, other people, ourselves, it's insane, right? So it's like, I don't know, two people take out a gun and shoot someone, and one person has a more extensive mental illness history, that person deserves less of a sentence. I don't see that, And anyway, I guess within this whole framework of lacking free will, we acknowledge that everyone's moral responsibility ultimately, whether you say how you want to define responsibility, that we all are equally responsible or equally not responsible, either way. And that really, but if you don't believe in free will, that you understand the mechanism of punishment, we understand why it exists, and it's, hopefully, it's mostly the justice system would be a way to protect people. But, I have acknowledged and disagree with Sam Harris, not Vaknin. Harris, I don't know how Vaknin feels about this particular issue. I'm sure he's talked about it. But with Sam Harris, Sam Harris tries to talk about, you realize you don't have free will, so stop being so revenge-oriented. And where I see where he's coming from, I've pointed out in past videos the sort of contradiction there. It's like, well, Sam, if someone harms an animal or my family member, suddenly thinking about their deterministic nature doesn't change my deterministic nature, which leads me to wanting blood. I want that revenge, so I don't know. I think there's other angles to look at trying to be less revenge oriented, just in terms of your own mental well-being and who is that serving, and maybe there are some instances where if you insofar as you want to pretend that you have free will, right? We're still, and I still do advocate for pretending you do, right? Is that being disingenuous? No, it's just that there is the illusion of free will is strong enough, and it's so impractical on most levels to even attempt to not live that way. It's like you're determined. I think Christopher Hitchens, I think, made a joke about this. I forgot how he put it, but essentially that I have no choice but to believe in free will, or to act as if I have free will, right? So, that's the sort of contradiction a lot of this deterministic philosophy is that ultimately, when you're sort of using determinism as a philosophy of how to behave in the world, the irony is that you already are determined to act however you're going to act. Now, maybe that person could argue, well, I also have no choice but to try to influence things, and my brain is pushing me to spread these ideas or philosophy. But there is an interesting element to that. And what I wrote down is, and I think I've talked about this before, but Vaknin talks about how we shouldn't think that we're different than a rock or a comet or an animal, and we can see how all these different creatures and beings and objects, inanimate objects, we can see how they don't have free will, and so we don't either. We're not special, super-powered exemptions to this. And while I agree, something that seems a bit absurd, and I'm not saying that I know what this would prove exactly, just something seems a little bizarre about it, is what differentiates us is being these self-aware robots. While fundamentally I agree, we're robots, rocks, animals, whatever, we're all part of we're all components to the machine, right? The universe machine. I agree with that idea. There is something that seems bizarre and different about humans, and even being able to contemplate. Like, that's where the irony is. Even being able to contemplate my lack of free will seems to almost, now I don't know if it really does, but almost wants me to say that it's disproving the theory in some way, right? To be aware, right? Can a robot really? Now, maybe a robot can be programmed to articulate these same sort of thoughts, and then so it appears, it's all an illusion or something. But there is this sense that humans have this self-awareness, this ability to even think so deeply as to recognize our own lack of autonomy, that other things that exist, other creatures, don't seem to have this ability. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know that in itself really would somehow prove free will or proves anything, but there seems to be something strange about that throws a wrench into things, right? That self-awareness, even though I can't quite put my finger on what that might mean, what the ultimate conclusion from that might be. Maybe someone else can think of ideas as to how that affects things. Let's see. He talks about that there's too much, there's so much that's unknown, that, people need this illusion of free will because without it, there's helplessness and hopelessness, realizing how we lack autonomy, how we can't control all these variables. And I don't know. I guess it all seems funny because I wonder if personally, since Vaknin would claim to not be under this illusion, even if he would claim to live as if he has free will, probably, I know I don't have free will, but I'll live as if I do. He might express something along those lines. Maybe he did. I don't know. So is the true what is the true belief at the end of the day? Can you really be that self-aware about self-deception? Can you really be that convinced of something that you simultaneously claim you don't believe in? Or is our ability to be in awareness of self-deception? Can you be deceiving yourself while being aware that you're doing so and continue to do that? Now, I can see moment to moment, perhaps, but, I wonder how often in his personal life do the thoughts creep up, oh my gosh, I can't control any of this, I'm freaking out, whatever. And, or, I've talked about, does it provide a sense of relief even? Does it provide a sense of relief to let go of always trying to control things, right? And saying that maybe there's a lot And perhaps everything is ultimately out of our control, and we're just watching this all play out. Just like the stars and the planets aren't controlling their pathways, we aren't either. And maybe there could be some relief in that. Let's see. All these notes are disorganized. I even thought about that. My notes are totally disorganized and all over the place. I thought, do I have free will to organize these notes? Could I have sat down and typed them up and printed it out? Could I have? I thought about it, but there was no part of me that really desired that. So while theoretically one can easily imagine a situation in which I typed out the notes in a more organized fashion so that I could make this video in a more concise and really follow, keep a train of thought without any pausing. Even as I thought about it, I almost, in that moment, sensed the lack of control there, right? I knew that I wasn't going to do it. And maybe it is just a matter of framing, whether you want to say that I chose to not type up the notes or I was destined to not type up the notes. But I can tell you my subjective experience, even while briefly contemplating it, was that the decision had already been made. And so what role does that thinking play in it? Was that thinking really an opportunity to do something different, or just part of the process of everything else? Alright, I decided to go inside, get away from all the noise, sit down. Charlotte doesn't need to be out in the heat for too long. And so how am I going to wrap this up? I think I covered most of what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to relate this just to some things in my personal life. Recently, someone, prank called me, because someone who dislikes me from some sort of interaction we had, and they had this really terrible voice, and I don't know if it was just all performance, as far as, I know there was a lot of performance involved in this prank call, but the voice, that was very grating, screechy. I don't know if that was real. Anyway, I guess that's not relevant. But essentially for a half an hour, they were on the phone with me and sort of interrupting something I was in the middle of doing. And I stayed on the phone for half an hour as they basically repeated over and over that I had broken their heart. We met on Bumble a couple years ago, and that they just want to fuck me, and will I meet them tonight to fuck them? Where can I meet? They want to have sex. Why did I hurt them? They love me. All this stuff is on repeat. But it was clearly, while it was clearly a prank call and insincere, the consistency of the message, not deviating, not engaging in any genuine interaction, and not even pranking in different ways, just kind of sticking to maybe 5 or 6 main points and lines, and seeming to be willing to go on with it endlessly, is a sign that this person definitely is disturbed, right? They made sure they called me they did the whole block number thing so that it didn't show who was calling. At the same time, my role in it, I mostly stayed calm, level-headed, kind of expressed that, come on, you're going to have I played along with it a little bit, tried to see if I could, get under their skin here and there, but mostly I just stayed calm and collected, listened to them, and said, all right, I understand you have an issue with me, you want to talk about it, or, that was kind of mostly my response for much of the 30 minutes. And I think while it might not be so related to the rest of this video, I think I'm just I just wanted to bring it up just to share this bizarre experience. But also that, why did I stay on the call for 30 minutes? And this is like a lot of situations I've described. Like, I could tell this is not a good thing, whatever it is, within 30 seconds. But really there definitely is the curiosity, who is this? Maybe I could find some way to make it rational. Oh, it's important to know who it is, and it's important to know who your enemies are, or whatever. But really, it's one of many decisions, and this is a minor decision, I suppose. Wasting 30 minutes of my life, sort of entertaining this troll who, probably has something against me. I'm sure we had some negative interaction at some point. But, I don't know. That there seems to be a lack of free will there, right? While you could say the words, you could have chosen to hang up, I really don't think I could. And if we do exist in a world, and I'm totally missing it, that there's something out there called free will that science really hasn't discovered on any level, but this theory of free will, then perhaps even just analyzing it from a deterministic perspective somehow will influence my free will to make better choices. And while in a lot of ways I really doubt that, because I've seen my behavior, I've seen the behavior of others, I have noticed, whether it's a mechanism of free will or determinism, as we become more self-aware, there does seem to be opportunities to engage in ways to make what appear to be free choices, and whether they're free or determined, the result of the self-awareness, whether or not we ever had any control over that self-awareness, right? Whether it's just pure circumstance and luck that we gained in self-awareness, it tends to impact us in, I would say, often in a positive way. I'm sure I could make a whole video theorizing on the way self-awareness could be a negative experience too, but there does seem to be a lot of benefit to understanding your nature, and also more or less accepting it. Does this mean saying I'm going to continue to make bad choices, or however you want to frame it, I'm going to continue to do these things that are against my self-interest, or whatever it may be? I don't know that that's necessary, but to accept, okay, here's my tendencies. I'm clearly driven by these things. I'm clearly prone to doing these things in these situations. And, there's a high degree of probability that certain experiences will repeat themselves, in some way. And to just be prepared and aware of that. And like I said, maybe in some sort of way, it could all be a contradiction if you're trying to connect this all back to like, okay, through all this deterministic self-awareness, you then have the freedom to make good choices. But really, I guess the way I want to conclude this is relating it to my job as a therapist and the idea of, the no free will. And it's just that, and one could say, well, how would you do that job if you believe that it's all determined? What's the point in trying to encourage sort of positive change? And really it's that it doesn't necessarily matter. Well, that's a whole other bag of worms, what matters. But in this context, I'm saying the reality is that my interactions with other people certainly influence them in some way. I have the ability, whether it's through deterministic outcome or freedom, how I engage in the world does affect people, can change people. Someone, as a result of talking to me, can interact in the world in a different way. And whether or not I ever had any freedom or they had any freedom in any of that, the fact that our two beings collided in this universe and then, go out and there's, results in interactions, behaviors, feelings, change occurs whether or not we have control over that change, and whether or not I have the freedom to choose how I interact with people, how I behave, how I think, whether or not other people can choose. It's certainly true that my deterministic path and theirs colliding affect the ultimate picture of both my life and theirs. And due to my experiences, due to my genetics, my trauma, my personality, attachment style, everything to do with my environment and biological being, makes it to where I do enjoy trying to have a positive impact on people, and I want to be liked by some people some of the time for all sorts of reasons that I may or may not be aware of. Well, I know that I'm not aware of all of them, and that's why I do what I do, free will or not.